Picture this. You're the smartest guy in ancient Greece, you just won a massive war, and you're finally heading home. It should be a 2-week commute, max, so how does that turn into a relentless 10-year nightmare? It's a question that's captivated audiences for nearly 3 millennia. Today, we're unpacking one of the oldest stories ever told. Well, let's dive right into this explainer. It's incredibly easy to look at this story as just some mythological monster mash, right? A fantasy adventure full of angry gods and terrifying creatures. But when you look closer, we're actually breaking down a tense psychological thriller. It's really a story about human arrogance, the desperate desire to survive, and the catastrophic cost of a single moment of unchecked ego. Part 1, the context of the epic. To truly grasp this epic poem, we gotta remember this wasn't originally a book that you could just pick up and read. We're talking about a story that is roughly 3,000 years old. It was an oral performance crafted over centuries, delivered entirely from memory by traveling poets called rhapsodes. Homer's epic relies on repetitive phrases and rhythmic storytelling, not just because it sounds beautiful, but because those patterns actually help performers memorize a massive narrative centered on a larger-than-life hero. What's also fascinating is that the real Trojan War likely happened around the 12th century BCE, but Homer composed this work centuries later, in the 8th century BCE. And this brilliantly illustrates the huge tonal shift from its prequel. See, the Iliad is all about rage and battlefield heroics. It focuses on Kleos, achieving eternal glory through war. Think of Achilles choosing to die a legend. But the Odyssey? That's all about nostos. It's about the grueling psychology of surviving peacetime, using your sheer intelligence to stay alive, and figuring out how to actually make it home without losing your mind. Part 2, the 10-year detour. So our journey kicks off right after Odysseus actually wins the Trojan War. He famously comes up with the idea to hide Greek soldiers inside a giant wooden horse, successfully burning Troy to the ground after a 10-year siege. War over. He starts his commute back to Ithaca with an absolute armada, 12 ships and over 600 men. But man, trouble starts literally immediately. They raid a city called Ismarus, suffer heavy casualties in a counterattack on the beach, and then a massive storm blows them to the island of the Lotus Eaters. There, a honeyed plant basically erases the crew's memories and ambitions, forcing Odysseus to drag his own men back to the ships while they are screaming. But the real turning point, that happens in a cave. This is where we see Odysseus's absolute defining trait in action, metis, which translates to skill, cunning, and raw intelligence. Trapped inside a cave by a massive one-eyed giant named Polyphemus, who, by the way, has started casually eating the Greek sailors raw, Odysseus plays the long game. He gets the giant dead drunk and introduces himself with a fake name, Nobody. After Odysseus manages to drive a flaming, sharpened olive stake into the giant's single eye, the Cyclops naturally screams for help from his giant neighbors. But because of that fake name, all they hear is, "Nobody is hurting me, no man is killing me." I mean, it is a blindingly brilliant pun. The other giants just walk away, and Odysseus and his surviving men escape the cave by strapping themselves to the bellies of the giant's sheep. Now, if they had just sailed away silently, our explainer would probably end right here. But Odysseus has a fatal flaw, a massive, totally unchecked ego. He simply could not stand the idea of nobody getting the credit for outsmarting this monster. As his ship pulls away, he actually stands up and shouts his real name and address back to the shore. It is a catastrophic mistake. Armed with a name, Polyphemus prays to his father, Poseidon, the god of the sea, to curse the entire voyage. Part 3, surviving the mythical gauntlet. Because of that single, prideful shout, the universe is now entirely rigged against this fleet. Let's walk through this timeline of relentless disaster. The wind god Aeolus gives Odysseus a bag of dangerous winds. They sail perfectly for 9 days. But on the 10th day, with Ithaca literally in sight, his suspicious crew opens the bag thinking it's gold, blowing them all the way back across the sea. Next, giant cannibals called Lastrygonians hurl boulders from cliffs, destroying 11 of the 12 ships. Down to one single ship, they land on the island of Circe, a witch goddess who turns half the remaining men into pigs, stalling them for an entire year. As Odysseus navigates the gauntlet, a really striking pattern emerges regarding the epic's female characters. Whether it's the sirens luring men to their deaths, the six-headed Scylla, the ship-sinking whirlpool Charybdis, or the nymph Calypso holding him hostage with the promise of immortality, the story is incredibly paranoid about female power. It reveals a profound double standard. Odysseus sleeps with magical women throughout the journey, yet aggressively demands absolute chastity from his wife back home, operating under a system where heroic men are rewarded for behavior that would completely condemn a woman. But after surviving all those monsters, the final blow is actually self-inflicted by his own men. Despite direct warnings from the underworld, his starving crew slaughters the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios, while Odysseus is asleep. The retribution is instant. Zeus splits their final ship in half with a thunderbolt. Every single man drowns. Over 600 men left Troy, and now 0 men, 1 survivor. Just Odysseus alone, clinging to the wreckage.
Part 4. A brutal homecoming.
Now, what's really interesting here is that after spending 7 years trapped by Calypso and finally getting a major assist from the Phaeacians, Odysseus wakes up on the beach of Ithaca. It has been 20 years since he left, and the narrative tone suddenly shifts perfectly from a fantasy adventure to a very tense, grounded psychological thriller. Because the odds against him are staggering. Over those 20 years, 108 men from surrounding islands have invaded his palace, draining his wealth, eating his food, and aggressively trying to force Queen Penelope into marriage. She's been stalling them with pure psychological warfare, promising to pick a husband when she finishes weaving a burial shroud and then secretly unweaving it every single night for years. Knowing that a direct approach against 108 armed men is absolute suicide, the goddess Athena disguises Odysseus as a filthy, broken old beggar. He enters his own home completely unrecognized, just silently storing up the abuse as the suitors mock him and throw a footstool at his head. But there is one heartbreaking moment of recognition. Argos, the hunting dog Odysseus raised as a puppy 20 years ago, lifts his head from a pile of manure, wags his tail at his old master one last time, and immediately dies. So Odysseus and his son Telemachus plan this flawless surgical strike. First, Telemachus locks away all the weapons in the palace. Sensing the tension, Penelope announces a challenge. She will marry whoever can string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow cleanly through 12 aligned axe heads. The suitors all strain, and they all fail. Then the ragged beggar steps up. He strings the bow with the effortless grace of a musician, fires the arrow perfectly, and then turns the bow on the suitors. The execution begins instantly, starting with an arrow straight through the throat of the lead invader. But, even with the palace purged, Penelope is traumatized by years of imposters. She refuses to just blindly believe this blood-soaked man is her husband. So she tests him. She casually orders a servant to move their bridal bed. Odysseus instantly flares up in anger, revealing their ultimate private secret. It's impossible to move, because he built the bed himself around the stump of a living olive tree still rooted in the ground. Recognizing the truth that only her husband could possibly know, Penelope finally breaks down and embraces him.
Part 5. The true cost of war.
Now, a lot of commentators argue the story should just end right there, on that romantic reunion, but it doesn't, because this explainer is really about the deeply uncomfortable reality of what it takes to put war away. Odysseus returns shaped entirely by trauma, survival, and constant moral compromise. He is a man who's been through so much that he no longer knows how to adjust to peacetime. His immediate response to young men eating his pigs and disrespecting his house is mass slaughter. And that slaughter incites the suitors' families to seek revenge, threatening a massive civil war. In the end, humans prove entirely incapable of breaking the cycle of violence themselves. It takes divine intervention, the goddess Athena descending to forcefully wipe the hatred from their hearts to finally restore peace. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. This epic completely proves that even the smartest person in the room can be ruined by their own unchecked ego. But beyond all the monsters and the myths, it forces us to confront the permanent scars of violence. If survival requires you to compromise absolutely everything, and returning home requires you to spill a river of blood, what does it truly cost to survive?